All right, so we're diving deep today into a world that pushes the limits of human endurance and strategy.
Oh yeah, a world where every ounce counts.
Exactly. We're talking about combat sports, and more specifically, the fascinating and sometimes controversial world of weight cutting.
It's a crucial aspect of the sport that often flies under the radar for casual fans, but it really dictates who can fight who and how they perform.
You've put together a really interesting collection of notes and articles here, everything from the science behind it to the real-world tactics fighters use.
Yeah, we've got a detailed breakdown of a typical fight week regimen, a plan for those last-minute emergency cuts, a more gradual approach spread over weeks, answers to common questions about this product called Albolene, which seems to be a bit of a game changer.
And even a glimpse into Albolene's original purpose, which I'm curious to learn about.
It's definitely not what you'd expect.
Okay, so mission objective for this deep dive, we want to equip our listeners with a solid understanding of the methods involved in a fighter's weight cut, the different approaches they take, and the crucial role Albolene plays.
And importantly, we're going to go beyond the what's and explore the why, the reasons behind these practices, and what it all means for a fighter's health and performance in the ring or the octagon.
Right, because it's one thing to know how they drop the pounds, but it's another to understand the impact it has on their bodies and ultimately their fighting ability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's start with the elephant in the room, or rather the jar of moisturizer in the gym bag. Albolene.
Albolene. It's mentioned constantly in these materials. So what is it about this product that's made it so popular in combat sports?
Well, what's really interesting is that Albolene wasn't originally intended for athletes at all. It was actually marketed as a moisturizing cleanser, primarily for removing makeup.
Makeup remover. That's a pretty far cry from the world of punches and takedowns. How did fighters even discover this stuff?
Well, they found that it's incredibly effective at increasing sweating and, shedding water weight quickly, which is critical for making weight before those weigh-ins.
So basically, they stumbled upon a beauty secret that became a strategic advantage in the fighting world.
You could say that what happens is that Albolene forms a barrier on the skin. It's occlusive, which traps heat, and that increased heat signals the body to sweat more as a way to cool down.
So it's like amplifying your body's natural thermostat.
Precisely. And it became a go-to method for fighters because it's relatively gentle on the skin compared to some of those more extreme dehydration tactics they used to rely on.
Now, you mentioned different approaches to weight cutting, and the materials you shared outline two main paths. The first one, the 48-hour emergency cut, sounds pretty intense. When would a fighter typically need to resort to something like this?
This is for those situations where a fighter needs to drop a significant amount of weight quickly. We're talking 5 to 10 pounds in just 2 days leading up to the weigh-in.
Wow, that's a lot of weight in a short amount of time. What kind of circumstances would lead to that?
Well, sometimes the fighter might just not be on track with their weight management and need a last-minute fix, or there could be a change of opponent that throws things off.
So it's like a high-stakes scramble to make weight.
Exactly. And it requires a combination of extreme measures. Strategic water manipulation being a key one.
Water manipulation, how does that work?
They'll start by overloading with water, like 1.5 gallons or even 2 gallons in the morning on day one.
That seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't that make them gain weight?
It's a temporary thing. The idea is to kind of trick the body into eliminating water more readily later on. So they follow that initial flood with severe restriction, cutting back to maybe 0.5 gallon by the afternoon, and then just sips on day 2.
So it's like setting up a water weight roller coaster.
Yeah, and the drastic shift in hydration, combined with a strict diet, really forces the body to shed water quickly.
You mentioned diet. What are they eating during this 48-hour crunch time?
It's super low carb and low sodium. Basically, lean protein sources like egg whites, chicken, fish, maybe some avocado or almonds for healthy fats, and very limited non-starchy veggies.
So the goal is to avoid anything that might cause water retention.
Right. They want to deplete their glycogen stores because glycogen binds to water, and reducing sodium helps minimize water retention too.
And this is where the Albolene comes into play, I'm guessing.
You got it. Multiple sweat sessions are a huge part of the rapid cut, and Albolene is used to really crank up the sweating.
So they slather it on and then hit the sauna?
Yeah, they might start with a thin layer and gradually increase it as the cut progresses. They'll wear sauna suits, do some light cardio for 30 to 45 minutes, maybe even take Epsom salt baths to try and pull out even more water.
Epsom salt baths. That's an interesting one. How's that supposed to help?
The idea is that the magnesium sulfate in the Epsom salts creates a kind of concentration gradient between the water and your skin cells. So theoretically, it draws out some of that excess fluid.
So like a mini osmosis spa treatment?
You could say that The science on how much water weight you actually lose from Epsom salts alone is a bit iffy, but a lot of fighters swear by it.
Okay, so the 48-hour emergency cut is clearly a demanding and potentially risky method. What about the other approach, the multi-week gradual weight cut? How's that different?
This is definitely the safer and more sustainable way to go about it. It's usually done over a period of 2 to 4 weeks, and the focus is on making gradual changes to the diet and training regimen.
So less shock to the system, more like a controlled descent.
Exactly. The diet is still high protein, moderate healthy fats, and low carb, low sodium. But the changes are introduced more gradually so the body can adapt.
So it's more about adjusting eating habits over time rather than a sudden and drastic overhaul.
Right. And consistent training is still important, but they might adjust the intensity and volume as they get closer to the fight to avoid burning themselves out.
So it's about finding a balance between cutting weight and maintaining their energy levels for the actual competition.
Exactly. And water manipulation is still part of the equation, but it's less extreme. They might start by drinking a lot of water, 2 gallons a day or so, and then gradually reduce the intake over the final week.
So it's a more measured approach to controlling hydration levels. And how does Albolene fit into this gradual weight cut?
They'll typically start using it in the final week, but it's not as intense as with the emergency cut. They might apply it before some moderate cardio sessions to enhance the sweating, but the goal here is to lose weight while preserving their energy for the fight.
So it's more about optimizing performance rather than just hitting a number on the scale.
Exactly. Now, speaking of fight week, the materials actually provide a pretty detailed timeline of how a fighter might use Albolene leading up to the weigh-in.
Okay, let's break that down. So starting on Sunday, the week of the fight, what's the plan?
The early part of the week is all about setting the stage. Sunday through Wednesday, they'll focus on staying hydrated, aiming for 15 to 2 gallons of water a day, and start cutting back on sodium and carbs. Training continues as usual, but there's no Albolene use yet.
So it's like the calm before the storm, building a solid foundation for what's to come.
Exactly. Then on Thursday, things start to ramp up. They reduce water intake to about 1 gallon, and this is when they might introduce a thin layer of Albolene before a light cardio session, maybe with a sauna suit to kickstart the sweating process.
Thursday is like the initial push to start shedding that excess water. And what about Friday, the day before the weigh-in?
Friday is when the real sweat induction happens. Water's cut down to half a gallon or even less. They're basically just sipping fluids at this point. And they'll apply a thicker layer of Albolene before a morning cardio session, again, probably with a sauna suit. And depending on how it's going, they might have another sweat session in the afternoon or evening, maybe even an Epsom salt bath.
Sounds pretty grueling, both physically and mentally. And then comes the moment of truth, Saturday morning, the weigh-in.
Exactly. Fluid intake is minimal on Saturday. If they're still slightly over their target weight, they might do a very light workout or a short sauna session with Albolene just to squeeze out those last few ounces. But the important thing is that once they hit their weight, they stop sweating immediately and start rehydrating.
Makes sense. It's all about hitting that number and then switching gears to recovery. So we've talked about how Albolene is used, but let's get into the science. How does it actually make someone sweat more?
It comes down to those occlusive properties we talked about. It basically forms a barrier on the skin trapping heat and raising the local temperature, which triggers the body's cooling mechanism, sweat.
So it's like creating a mini sauna on your skin.
Exactly. And the specific ingredients contribute to this effect. Petrolatum and paraffin are the main heat trappers. Mineral oil helps with application and prevents excessive drying. And the beta-carotene is there as an antioxidant, probably, to help with skin health during this intense sweating phase.
It's pretty amazing how such a simple product can have such a targeted and significant effect on the body. But making weight is only half the battle, right? What happens after the weigh-in? What are the crucial steps for recovery?
The immediate aftermath of the weigh-in is absolutely vital. They need to rehydrate and refuel properly. The first priority is getting electrolytes back in. They'll typically drink things like Pedialyte or coconut water, which are rich in those essential minerals.
So not just chugging gallons of water right away.
No, that could actually be dangerous. They need to reintroduce fluids gradually, maybe a liter or two over the first few hours. Then they'll focus on replenishing those depleted glycogen stores with easily digestible carbs like white rice, bananas, honey.
Quick energy sources to get the system back up and running.
Right. Then a bit later, they'll have a more balanced meal with lean protein, healthy fats, and complex carbs to continue the recovery process.
So it's a carefully staged recovery process to get them back to fighting shape. Now, were there any important considerations or warnings that stood out from the research?
Yes, definitely. It's crucial to remember that this kind of weight cutting is primarily about losing water weight, not fat. And intentionally dehydrating yourself to this extent comes with inherent risks.
Like what kind of risks?
Heat exhaustion, electrolyte imbalances, which can be really dangerous. And even if they make weight, it can negatively impact their performance in the fight.
So it's a high-risk, high-reward strategy.
Exactly. And that's why these materials emphasize the importance of consulting with medical professionals, nutritionists and trainers before attempting anything like this. This is not something to be taken lightly. It's a specialized practice for professional athletes under very specific circumstances.
It's a good reminder that even though we're fascinated by this world, it's not something to try at home without expert guidance. So for our listeners who may not be professional fighters, what are some key takeaways from this deep dive into the world of combat sports weight cutting?
I think it offers a fascinating glimpse into the dedication, discipline, and strategic thinking that goes into this sport. It highlights the lengths these athletes go to compete and the complex interplay between their bodies and their performance.
We've seen how meticulous the planning is, the science behind manipulating water weight, and the critical importance of proper recovery. It shows that even seemingly simple goals can involve intricate and sometimes risky methods.
It makes you think about the weight we all carry in our own lives, the goals we strive for, and the strategies we use to get there. And it raises an important question. Are those strategies sustainable and healthy for us in the long run?
That's a great point to ponder. We've just scratched the surface here. There's so much more to explore about fighter nutrition, the psychology of weight cutting, the debates about safety regulations in combat sports.
Definitely a lot of food for thought. And maybe topics for future deep dives.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for bringing this fascinating and complex world to light.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and always remember to prioritize your health.
And maybe skip the Albolene unless you're stepping into the octagon.
Exactly. That's all for this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.